Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Your Body Has Your Back podcast. We are so excited to have the one and only Michelle Shapiro here as a guest today. Michelle is an integrative functional registered dietitian in New York City who has helped over 1,000 clients reverse their anxiety, approach their weight lovingly, and heal their digestive issues. She aims to bridge the gap between body positivity and functional nutrition, which is a huge piece of what we are going to be diving into today. Not only is Michelle an incredible functional dietitian, she is a dear, dear friend of mine, and we could not be more excited to share her brilliance with you today on the podcast. So welcome, Michelle.
Oh my gosh. It's like so different. So you go on your friend's podcast and that's one thing, but when you have like two of your actual real life friends that you're sitting down with, it's a wild experience. So we are going to have a lot of fun today and I'm so honored to be here. Thank you both so much for having me.
We are so excited to be here with you, have you as our guest and kind of share your like amazing insights.
Let's dive right in. When we have a guest on the podcast, we love to ask them a little bit about their own story. And Michelle, you have a really interesting and incredible story that I'd love for you to share with our listeners.
Absolutely. And I think it's always fun when I share the personal story at the beginning because like so many of us, and I know certainly for the two of you, we treat what we have. And so a lot of the conditions that I work with are just my personal experience that we get so jazzed about and so excited about because we desperately want answers. It's not really that exciting. We really want answers. So my story is definitely a story of anxiety and weight loss in all the wrong ways. And basically I share my story with people, not as a to-do tale, but to not do tale. So I am Michelle Shapiro. I grew up in Queens, New York. That is relevant because I grew up in joyously one of the most diverse of body, mind, spirit, race, creed, gender orientation of anywhere in the world. And there's a lot of amazing benefits to that too. And growing up in Queens, again, I was really accepted for all that I was. And I had occupied a larger body from the age of about 5 to 18. It did impair my life in some ways, I think, and in some relationships and things like that. But on the whole, I probably grew up in a place where being in a larger body was maybe the easiest versus other places that were more homogenous. So I was going away to college, the University of Delaware. And once I got accepted and I wanted to go for nutrition, I realized, oh my gosh, like Delaware is a really homogenous place and people aren't going to probably accept me at face value. So I want to lose weight drastically before I go there. And I did. So, and this is I'm issuing a huge trigger warning here. I could not recommend this less, but I lost over 100 pounds in about 3 months, 3 to 4 month period of time. So I went away to school and I, from a societal standpoint, was validated tremendously for this weight loss. People who were just meeting me, you can really notice people interacting with you differently, which is so terrible and positive at the same time. You get a lot of benefits of being in a thinner body. And then while this was happening, I was basically rotting on the inside because I was starving and had so many medical issues pop up seemingly out of nowhere. And I was going from doctor to doctor. I had new diagnoses of hypothyroidism, acid reflux, gut IBS, and I was having debilitating panic attacks on a daily basis. It took my dietetic schooling and then eventually seeing a naturopathic physician to really understand that drastic weight loss caused such an imbalance in my body that my body started sending me all these signals that we're shutting down because we're starving to death. And my body was basically like, I'm going to try to save your life here. So my story was really of healing was after the weight loss. The weight loss itself wasn't a positive part of my journey. It was a successful, quote unquote, part of my journey because I was able to lose it and keep it off for a very long period of time. But the rebuilding of my health was a daunting journey. So I would rather my clients and anyone listening not lose weight the wrong way the first time, but still feel like if losing weight is important to them, it's okay to do that. And we'll talk about what that means kind of on a bigger scale throughout this conversation too.
What I think your story highlights so well is that kind of the desire for two things at the same time. This idea of, health, which we almost take for granted, I think sometimes when we are beginning a journey, and then desire for weight loss, which in our kind of modern day world, for maybe the first time ever, there's like two roads, kind of weight loss and health. Mm-hmm. And we can see them when done incorrectly or, out of alignment with the speed and the care for our body, we can see them take us in two different directions. And I think your story really most likely resonates with a lot of our listeners who are navigating their own kind of healing journeys or just health journeys. And they're kind of coming up to this same experience of hearing really polarizing messages in this world of nutrition. And I think, we can think of a lot of examples probably in the weight loss world, but I think one that I see like so often this kind of conflicting nutrition message is even things like seed oils. And it's like when you look at one person on, let's say, social media, they're like, seed oils are great. Don't even worry about them. And then you flip to the next person and they're talking about like seed oils are going to kill you even if you look at them. And that's really where I think these kind of conflicting messages, these polarizing messages in the nutrition, the weight loss, and the health world can be really challenging for our viewers to navigate. And that's definitely, I think, what you speak so eloquently towards, of really helping to toe the line and kind of navigate that more, what is really the conversation that's undertoning all of that tension between those two worlds.
There is so much tension. And I think the worst part of there being so much tension is that who's getting lost in the mix is the actual consumer of the information, the person listening, the person eager to get help. This idea that people are legitimately trying to help their health and are getting two pieces of completely contrary information is so frustrating for me and so devastating. And I think that's what we can hope people can leave with, is how to sort through that information and how to understand the context of what the heck they're seeing, because it's really weird. It's not like we're looking at something and one's a personal trainer posting information, another person's a dietitian. You could look at two dietitians' posts and they can have completely opposite information. So I just want to speak to that point for a second and why that's happening, because I think that's so important to people too. As dietitians, we learn the same curriculum in school roughly, and pretty much semester by semester, school by school, our accreditation program is quite similar. The application of that can be quite different, and the interpretation of research can be quite different. Now, of course, the three of us are functional dietitians. How we practice might be totally different than how a conventional registered dietitian practices. How we practice might be completely different than how an intuitive eating or a health at every size practitioner practices. So the weird and frustrating thing about nutrition information is that we don't really have a consensus, so to speak. There's not one governing body. We have one, but we don't really refer to them for too much. But there is kind of one, but we don't really. I wouldn't even say the name. We don't really like it and don't really agree with it. And what's left over is that people have differing experiences and views for what they prioritize for their clients. So a body positive or health at every size practitioner, truly to the depths of their core, believe that it's okay if you eat anything as long as you're honoring your spiritual, psychological self. Versus a functional dietitian like us, we might see someone eating seed oils and watch actual inflammatory markers change in their body. So for us, it's like, boom, we have this evidence. But the way that you're looking at a problem differs from practitioner to practitioner, and we don't have that consensus, which is so hard, I think, for people to understand, is that there's medical consensus a little bit more, but still confusing. But nutritionally, you can interpret research in so many different ways and with so much bias, I think.
I completely agree. And I think not only is there not a consensus, one camp is kind of, pinning, you're kind of pinned against each other or against the opinions, if that makes sense, where people, aren't just seeing differences in recommendations. It's like they're between a rock and a hard place, I guess is a better way to put it. And, with the weight loss example, thinking about the two different camps, in one camp, we have, messaging around weight loss and the pursuit of weight loss not being, ever healthier, health promoting, and people feeling a lot of shame and guilt around that.
Totally.
And then the other camp that is taking a much more rigid and restrictive approach, and, everything is weight focused. And, obviously that can lead to a lot of other problems, health wise, relationship with food wise. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of, what people are, seeing on social media?
Absolutely. And I actually am glad you invited the opportunity for us to walk it back, because, I love walking it back and backing it up, to just let's just make a definition for the two camps that we're seeing and talking about. Let's call, now this is not a perfect science. Let's speak to it on a concept level. There's two camps right now, basically. Let's call it body positivity and let's call it diet culture. So the body positivity movement, which we're in, is considered like the third wave of the fat acceptance or body positivity movement. Much of it is predicated on the idea that people are discriminated against for their weight, and trying to lose weight by forcing weight loss is not only effective, but psychologically dangerous. I don't think anyone can really disagree with that. I think that's pretty, straight up. I think the moral principles of the proponents of the body positivity movement are 100% rock solid, correct. It's not really negotiable in my head. Like, if you don't believe
Agreed.
that people of all body sizes deserve equality and equity, like, goodbye. Like, that's not the conversation we're having here. That's certainly not. Yeah. I always say that to people when they're like, do you think that people are promoting obesity by existing? I'm like, definitely not my thing. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think there's more nuance in this conversation that needs to be had. So let's say there's the body positivity side that was bred out of weight stigma, discrimination, and honestly, just the total ineffectiveness of diets in general. So that group, the body positivity group, can kind of be broken down into different segments, I would say. Like, there's people who are more militant and believe any weight loss you attempt is totally wrong. There's people who are really more militant and believe that there's this phrase, all foods fit. You can eat anything and it doesn't matter. When you go really far into that group, and using the word militant, I don't know if that's the best word, but the more extreme side of that group, you immediately start losing people who work with us three, because people who have chronic illness certainly cannot eat whatever they want and in any capacity prioritize their psychological relationship with food over their physical relationship with food. And what I mean by that is this: all of the extreme versions of body positivity have the idea that if you deal with your relationship with food, your health problems will be better. But it's not everyone's priority to only deal with their relationship with food. Some people, and I know the amazing work both of you do, like, let's say someone's going to Abby and they have parasites. You can't intuitively eat your way out of parasites. Like, you're going to have to get those suckers out, right? There's no way to do that. And you could probably send Abby pictures of them after. That's a classic Abby thing. Exactly. So I think that it's a really beautiful and positive thing to say, hey, you have to honor your relationship with food and your body and hunger. But then when it comes down to it, people who have any sort of chronic illness really get lost in the mix of the intuitive eating or body positivity movement. So again, there's the idea of intuitive eating and body positivity is morally rock solid. I don't have a problem with it at all. It's when you get into the nuance of it scientifically and really the underlying belief, which functional dietitians all three of us are so hardcore about, which is that we believe people can actually heal. And the body positivity group is more focused on repairing your relationship with food. And kind of, I feel the underlying belief, like we said before, is that you kind of have to cope with chronic conditions. You can't really heal them. And I don't think that they have the expertise or training that functional dietitians do to actually help people heal. So I'm like, man, if you saw people heal from parasites, you would be like talking about parasite cleanses all the time. If you saw how much better people feel. But it's just that it's studying a different craft completely. One favors a psychological solution. And my belief in my heart of hearts is that functional dietitians are not the diet culture side. I believe that we are smack dab in the middle because we believe in intentional food changes that honor someone psychologically as well. That was a very long-winded answer, and I apologize already.
No, that was an amazing answer. And I agree with you. I think, us and the functional dietitians we know in this space do fall somewhere in the middle. We're not disregarding the relationship with food and, the psychological pieces. It's really the personalization based off where the individual is at and combining all of these different things. I love how you explain that, because I do feel like there's a lot of people who, struggle with chronic health conditions and feel like there isn't a place for them in, the body positivity world, in the space of, developing a positive relationship with food. And it has to be one or the other. I think what you're saying is that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle.
It is. And there's let's use gluten as an example. Jillian, this is so hot for us. We text about this all the time.
I know.
But, I'm not going to give any blanket nutrition recommendations. That's not where this is not medical advice anyway. So this is not nutrition advice anyway. But there are some PCOS dietitians who will say, hey, everyone can eat gluten, don't restrict yourself or something like that. And you can cut this out if it's too hot. But I think that
nothing's too hot.
Exactly. It's hot in the nutrition world. I think that it's nice to say, hey, you don't have to have restriction to heal. And it's totally different in practice, because I can tell you some clients who have PCOS, as both of you have experienced, or have gut issues. Maybe there's someone with a gut issue, which all three of us work with, can actually tolerate gluten. Great. We love people to get away with as much as they can, by the way. That's our goal, is like get away. We want the least restriction possible. Mm-hmm. But when there's a time and place, like if a client comes to us and does have a gluten intolerance, regardless of if they don't show up as perfectly celiac, but they have some sort of an intolerance, I see a lot in the All Foods Fit group being like, there is no medical evidence to support cutting out gluten. I'm like, oh, but are your clients like having diarrhea 15 times a day when they eat gluten? Like it's nice to say, right? It's really nice to say. And it's totally different when it comes to someone's life. And so we have to find exactly what works for that exact person and help the individual. So saying to someone, cut out gluten is not something that we would do. When I'm recommending someone like take out, and again, I'm not demonizing gluten in any way, I'm just using it as an example, but if I say to someone like, hey, I think that you might be reacting to gluten, I have to have like a deep conversation about what the word gluten even means to them on a spiritual level before I'm making that recommendation. Because where I will say there is a problem, and we do have some functional dietitians falling into the diet culture end, is something that you guys always talk about, which is when people hand someone an elimination diet and say, see you later. That can cause absolute food fears and psychological issues with someone, which can lead to huge health issues. Not even a question. But to approach someone and say like, hey, when I say the word gluten, how do you feel? And they're like, oh, I don't think I can, I'm Italian. I don't think I can cut out pasta or something like that. I'm Jewish. I'll use the bagel example. Like, oh, how am I going to, I have Jewish holidays coming up or something like that. I think that asking the person what their priority is, again, if not running to the bathroom 15 times a day because they're intolerant is their priority, they're not going to care about their relationship with food as much. They're going to care more about like, please I'm coming to you to help my gut fix. I'm not coming to you to fix my relationship with food. But we can still honor someone's relationship with food and be very gentle around a relationship with food while still pursuing health goals. And one little tiny thing I'll say too is that I love intuitive eating as a set of principles. And I think it's kind of like step one, but then there's other steps of the process for healing your health. It's and for supporting your health. It's not just, hey, you healed your relationship with food. Now your, metabolic dysfunction is gone and like your immune system's running perfectly. Like, no, then the work might start after that.
Because I think it's the idea that you just brought up is like, okay, we have our relationship with food, but what about our relationship with our body? And listening to the intuitive, or blatant physical signs that our body is communicating to us, and those like white flags that will eventually turn into red flags if we continue to participate in living a lifestyle which includes the nutrition choices that we're making that are potentially like very much aggravating the underlying root causes that are present in the body. And I think this kind of brings up that idea of, certainly like extreme elimination diets break down the relationship with food. We have research on that now. And there's a lot of reformed functional dietitians that are kind of like, we apologize. We realize what we were doing wrong. And we are now like backtracking and doing our work. So we're, part of our job is working with the clients of the fallout of that. The amount of clients that come to each of us. And we're like, oh, you're eating like 5 foods. Like, okay, let's start to welcome more foods in the diet. And that's, part of the healing. But almost on the other side, and I'd love you to kind of speak to this too, is this like normalization of symptoms. Everybody bloats. Oh, you get some loose stool. That's normal. Oh, or it's like eczema. I've had it my entire life. So like, don't even worry about it. It's just like, I'm an eczema person. That's who I am at my core. And it's like, we're normalizing the white flags from our body. And then all of a sudden it's like this diagnosis came out of nowhere. And we're sitting here being like, no, it came from somewhere. But the, part of the potentially under that umbrella of like intuitive eating allowed us to maybe sweep a lot of these things under the rug until they became too loud that we can no longer sweep them under the rug.
Yeah, I I love that you brought that up too. There was that wave. There was like a couple months, like I think it was like in 2020. It was like a COVID thing where people were just posting pictures of themselves being really bloated and like and it was always like really thin white women too. And I'm like
that
good
is
on
still
seeing
happening.
I
saw it last week.
Yeah.
I'm like, first of all, call Abby or Jillian or myself up, please. Second of all, I was like, it was like this thing where everyone was posting pictures of them being bloated and be like, this is normal. I'm like, bro, that is not normal at all. And like the bar for which, so this is all right. Yeah. Abby, you got me jazzed, Abby. So
you're like exactly where I want you.
The level, there are certain things in our health, and this is where the delicate work of working with a really good practitioner comes in. There are things in our health that we should tolerate and accept, and there are times when we need to fight our asses off for our health. And that line of what we should tolerate has gone up so high because, again, of this underlying belief in Western medicine and in any group that's influenced by it, that our bodies spontaneously break, that we are inherently broken, and that we have no capacity to heal. So if you labor under that assumption, that line of what's acceptable in ways of illness gets higher and higher, and that threshold gets higher. And when I say there's times to accept, like, listen, if you have a chronic illness diagnosis, which is 100% of our clients, like, I'll give myself as an example. Like, I am an extremely social person. I have like a bunch of friends that I love a lot and we do stuff, but like, I don't drink or smoke or anything. So if my friends and I need to be in bed by like 8 p.m., legitimately. So my friends are like, all right, let's meet at 7 a.m. and go for a walk. We'll get lunch and then you're done. Because I know my capacity is if I don't get to bed at a certain time, I'm texting Jillian like, oh, the histamines, the next day or whatever it is. I think that everyone needs to know what their limits are. And the goal of chronic illness is to push the barrier of those limits a little bit of healing. I call it like pushing the baseline, right? Like you're making that baseline of illness a little bit better, right? That's always the goal. But there are some things that people with chronic illness might have some limitations on, and it's okay to just sit with those symptoms and be like, I hate these, but they're sending me a signal, and knowing that you might have to craft your life a little differently, which is a hard message to hear, but it's certainly a more hopeful one than you're screwed and you can't do anything. Trust me, we think you can do like 90% of the fighting, but there might be like a 10% acceptance that can just be very nervous system calming, So I think that idea of illness is so pervasive. I call it sick talk. It's like all of TikTok is like, oh yeah, like this being 30 is all about waking up feeling violently ill. And I'm like, wow, it's literally not. We're very young. Like this is so not the game, at all. Though I will say that we have more rates of chronic illness that are out of our control. And again, we could have that conversation too. But yeah, I'm seeing this normalization of illness and this pushing of what's normal, because I also both Abby and Jillian, definitely you guys agree with me on this, but like, people do not actually believe it's possible to heal from chronic conditions. It's wild.
As a whole, we don't want to kind of perpetuate the normalization of the chronic illness and the symptoms and not kind of feeling your best or working towards feeling your best. And it's just really interesting how extreme things are, and how the pendulum swings from, kind of one end of the spectrum to the other. And, I just, at the end of the day, who is it helping to say it's normal to be, so distended that, you're looking 6 months pregnant at the end of the day from, after eating dinner? Who is that helping? And, we're not here to tell people that, they should feel shame about symptoms or anything like that. But I think the goal is, again, somewhere in the middle, right? To share with people that there is an opportunity to heal. And if they want that opportunity, hey, we're here to help you and to support you in, a way that isn't, on one end of the spectrum or the other. So
is it like that diet culture? What I think that people got so thrown off by like before and after pictures from diet culture too, that, and this is something that I can't make it too hot, but I would say that people who sell nutrition programs really like to target people's pain points, which none of us do and are really careful to not do. So I think people are sick of being the prey of practitioners in some ways too, saying like, you can fix all of your gut issues, when we know it's like a super complicated, delicate, individualized, compassionate journey. It's not like this thing where it's like, take this supplement, you'll be all good. Like that is not that is not at the heart of functional dietetics at all. That is not the definition of functional, which is treating something from the root cause in the most supportive way possible, right? Like, so I think that a lot of what we're seeing now is a knee-jerk response to something else, right? It's like, all right, diet culture went too hard. People are like, not only does dieting suck, it never works. And there's nothing, and I always refute the claim that 98% of diets fail. I'm like, that is such a broad sentence. You would have to define every single diet and what failure means in the most specific, like I think that doesn't, to me, that's so unscientific.
One study, basically, that it's like
one diet
regurgitated over and over and over,
which I'm sure failed in whatever way they considered failing.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But I think it's these the emotional response of people to, hey, I don't want to be sold a gut supplement and say your gut's going to be perfect either. And I don't want to it's people empathizing with each other, I think, in a nice way. But the people who are posting that it's normal to be bloated also, I think what we're talking about is there's also like potential harm in that too. I forget, there was like this study, and it was either out of Yale or Harvard, and it was like in 2005 or something like that. And it basically showed that the people's weight or people's health status was directly correlated with the people they spent the most time with. And this could be people they even just talked to on the phone. So it's not like people who were in like a weight loss group with them and they were eating the same way. It's just that we are very influenced by what we see and what we consume in ways of information and who we connect with. So I think that if we hear from someone else like, hey, it's normal to be this bloated, or it's normal to feel sick all the time, I think, well, we accept that a lot more, and it affects our subconscious a lot more. And I think what's frustrating for us is that we legitimately know that it's possible, again, to help people with this, but I don't think that the people who are, trained as health at every size practitioners have the same it's a different education. It's a different, mode of thinking.
And I think there's a piece to it too of like, in the way that, we're working with clients in like kind of the functional realm of saying like, hey, in order to heal from those, frustrating symptoms that you're experiencing, like we're going to have to do things different. We're going to have to make some change. And there's fear in change. So we're, asking and when holding space for like, all right, we're identifying that there's discomfort in the body. There's a communication from the body of, hey, like something's not right. And then, in this, I like to call it like healing windows. I'm like, in our healing window, we're going to do some things different. We might take gluten out if we get, the symptoms and the testing and like, the information from your body that like, hey, this isn't helping. And this quite frankly might be driving some of those responses or what have you. Is it always going to look that way? No, that's the beauty of the body and healing. We can build resilience, and then we can be maybe a little loose with the diet, or maybe we can invite things back in. But that piece of, and I know you kind of use this word like coddling of that, message is so detrimental to kind of allowing people to create this fear around like, what would life look like if I actually dealt with what's underneath these health symptoms. And part of that is, the emotions that are maybe driving some of the health symptoms. Those might be some of the things that we fear the most. But I think when we look in this, the kind of through that lens of like, is there a place for like therapeutic diets inside of the like health at every size, intuitive eating, like, whatever word we want to throw in there, kind of, is there a place that both of those can kind of come together?
I think, but I'm pretty biased, but I think functional nutrition is the answer. But I'm quite biased, and I'm with a quite biased group here, okay? I do believe there's a world in which, again, it's what we didn't talk about before in backing it up, is that a lot of what these I call them psychological solutions for physical problems, a lot of what they're centered around is taking the morality out of the food decisions we make, which I think is something that is essential in functional nutrition. Because like, if someone wants to, and I use this as a metaphor, but let's say we take something like a knife, for one person, a knife can be a tool to cut up some food. It can be, helpful to make some food. For another person, a knife could be a tool that could be used for self-harm or harming someone else. So nutrition information is like a knife in that people can use it for good, or it can be for a non-discerning eye, something that's potentially damaging. So that means that if someone has a really disordered relationship with food and they hear about macros or, gluten or something like that, they can transform that into food fears a little bit easier, I think, for sure. So it's really important for us to know when people are ready to receive information and to constantly take the morality out of food decisions. It's not like eating something has anything to do with who you are as a person. If you eliminate gluten from your diet, it doesn't mean that, again, you eat gluten and you're bad or something like that. It just means you ate gluten. It's only data, right? We just look at everything as data and take the heat out of all of these decisions. I think what's been really hard and that I've been seeing in the lack of this bridge between the two worlds is that, it's funny, Abby, you said before, clients come to you after being on strict elimination diets, and then they're coming and they're like, I don't want to do that again. What I'm seeing now is people doing diet culture, then going to a health at every size practitioner, and then the health at every size practitioner, and this has happened with a lot of my clients because I'm now this middle ground person between these worlds. Then they're saying you can't lose weight because losing weight is morally bad. And my issue with all of this is you're still putting morality on something. You're still saying what someone else is doing is right or wrong. And I know the goal with all three of us and the clients we work with is to let people make autonomous decisions. I don't give nutrition information as a recommendation that's forced. It's here's the information. How do you want to receive this information to support you? I'm not telling them what's right and wrong. We're crafting these things together. So it's really important in bridging the gap between these two worlds to understand the client's priorities, where they're at, and really understanding the timeline of their health and their psychological health, all components, their whole biography as a person, which is, again, a cornerstone of functional nutrition is understanding someone's timeline. And I think that the bridge comes in being really individualized and not impressing your own thing onto the client. So, and if you're the client listening, not if a practitioner, this is another piece of advice I have for people consuming information. Go to practitioners as a client who work with the conditions you're looking to treat, but don't only prescribe to a modality. And what I mean by that is, if a practitioner said to me, I am a health at every size practitioner, I use intuitive eating principles, I don't want only one tool in the toolbox. I want a bunch of tools, but with you can go to someone who's specialized in a condition. That's totally fine. But don't go to someone who only uses one treatment modality. That's what I would say is really important for people. That's how you'll know they're bridging all these different things, because I can tell you there's no two clients in my practice whose plan comes out the same at all, because people are at so many different stages, and we are taking into account our mental health, our spiritual health. And there's no goal that a client can come to me with and say, I want to lose weight, where I'm going to say, no, weight loss is bad, because they just told me they wanted to lose weight. I would explore tell me about the urgency of that. And we can address the urgency of weight loss, because, feeling like you want to lose weight, you can feel very unsafe in your body. So addressing the safety issue is really, really important, but not dismissing or invalidating what someone wants to do in their health. We can't do that. We can't afford to do that.
I think that piece of really understanding the why behind the desires for that individual. And it comes back down to that individual and the conversations that are hopefully happening between that provider and that client, and the relationship that's built between that provider and that client, the container of it, and recognizing, where the example of weight, weight's a symptom. So then we can kind of look at it all right, it's a symptom of, yes, the lifestyle and the nutrition, but it's also a symptom of safety in the body. I mean, both of us have had, mold toxicity experiences, and there is, what is the condition that loves to hold on to weight? Mold. It's just going to dilute. Yeah. And so it's kind of and I have had, a journey of kind of weight in my own life. And it's that piece of, why is my body not losing weight? And it's actually I had to have a deeper conversation of really understanding, also recognizing there were other symptoms at play for me personally. And if I wasn't allowing that deeper conversation, even the emotional side of that conversation to happen, I would have miss the most impactful part of healing, that then at a certain point, your body's like, oh, I'm ready and safe to just like release this weight. And you're like, wow, that felt really nice. And that felt really graceful. And that felt very like empowering, versus that kind of like separating out of, kind of hammering in of a goal without kind of guidance around it. Something that kind of you touched on, and there's like a term that I like more recently was introduced to, and I'd love to kind of hear your like thoughts on it, because I feel like it pertains really to that like intuitive eating world of this term like health privilege. And how
I like that.
Yeah, I like Robin Fortan was the one who like first said it to me, and I was like, oh, okay, like I get it, because I'll speak to my own story. Like, I love the idea of intuitive eating. I feel the same way that you do, of like, yes, get it, subscribe, all of that. But like, I did not have health privilege. I was sick for years. And, I could still participate in my life in some degree. So was I, in an ICU? Absolutely not. But I couldn't participate in this, like, eat whatever I want, use my body in whatever way I want, because I was chronically fatigued, and I, would have all these hosts of symptoms, and I would literally never go to the bathroom if I didn't like create a very like supportive container around my body. So, the idea of, if I didn't make those changes in my life, which go against if someone was working with me in that like health at every size, kind of intuitive eating, whatever, I would have been like breaking the code. And so I'd love to get your take on like this word health privilege in that vein. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story too. That just, I just learned some things about you here too, that I loved to learn too. I actually made a post about this like 6 months ago, and it was intuitive eating is a privilege for those who are not struggling with chronic illness. Same exact concept basically, which is that, like, it's so funny because I'll have clients coming to me again who are having like diarrhea 15 times. I don't know, diarrhea is like my word of the day today, but they're having I mean, I know it's been said many times on this podcast. Exactly. But they're having diarrhea like 15 times a day. Maybe they're throwing up from reflux. Their digestive system is just on fire. And they would love nothing more in the world than to talk about their relationship with food. That would be like an amazing, fun conversation for them at that point. Now, I have to say this. If someone is struggling with an eating disorder and it is something that is life-threatening, it's not even a question that becomes the priority. But we need to understand that there's levels of this, right? And I think that the premise of a lot of anti-diet books, I'll say, is that your relationship with food is driving all of your physical symptoms. That is the one thing. And weight stigma is actually what makes people gain weight, not the foods that they're consuming. That's actually a big premise in one of these books I'm thinking of specifically. So I think that the priority and urgency of someone's needs, it has to be taken into account. And it's really funny because if I'm working with that client who's going to the bathroom and has, so often and has acid reflux, I love the day when they come to me. And this happened a couple of weeks ago with one of my very long-term clients. I think we've had over 100 sessions together. Like, we're in this thing together. And she said to me, like, Michelle, like, I don't know how many carbs to eat. I'm so confused about it. And I was like, oh my God, we could talk about like food. This is so fun, because she had been suffering so tremendously in the beginning of our work together that like we didn't have the opportunity, or like this word privilege, to even focus on the relationship with food, because we had to get her into a stable enough condition to get back to work. I mean, it wasn't even like she couldn't attend family events. She couldn't see people. Her immune system was so down. Her gut was so impaired. It became, it went from chronic, I would say like it was acute on chronic illness in the beginning. And now we're at the point where we can just have these like fun conversations about macros, and it's just like, I'm like, this is so great. And when you're healing from a chronic illness journey, when you can actually start to have those conversations again, because it's really fun. Sorry, Jillian. Yeah.
Oh no. Anyway, no, I'm just like in agreement with you in terms of like, it really is all about that individualization, and it's cool how you can pull in different tools based off what the priorities are on that individual's healing journey. And doesn't mean you completely disregard the relationship with food, or you disregard, some of the kind of more tangible strategies. It's all about that kind of customization. And I think for me, what comes up a lot is the women I work with in terms of working with a lot of PCOS is the severe insulin resistance and, how crappy women feel, how fatigued, the, kind of insulin driven hormonal, like, carbohydrate, sugar cravings and things that don't feel like they are in your control, because ultimately they're not, in terms of if you're trying to, just tune in and tap into hunger and fullness and, which these things are really important, in terms of connecting with those biological hunger fullness cues. But if you haven't laid a foundation to kind of address the insulin resistance and sort of support some stability there, trying to tap into that hunger fullness is going to feel like a freaking roller coaster, and it's going to be super stressful. And I see that a lot, in terms of what you mentioned, Michelle, of women having worked with a functional provider, worked with, intuitive eating provider, and now they're like, there's no place for me type thing. So I just, I think being able to acknowledge the priority and, bring in all of these different, modalities and tools and, things to support the individual is most important. So
I totally obviously agree with everything you guys say, but I totally specifically agree with that. And I think that another piece of this health privilege puzzle, or it's so funny because you're saying like, there's no place for people, but I hope people listening to this know, like, this is the place, guys. Like all of us.
That's where it's at.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. There is a world. We promise there is an actual world that can take both the psychological relationship with food into account and the physical self into account. You absolutely can. But this idea of health privilege is something that I also, from something you said, Jillian, that I have to go back to, which is that the body positivity movement and practitioners, who I think are all very virtuous. I think the goal is very positive to make people feel included. It became this thing that was intended to be really inclusive. And for our people, the people who come to us, it became very exclusive. And it became something where people felt like, I literally cannot all foods fit right now. Like I literally cannot do that right now. And for me, what concerns me the most, and I've never really said this on a podcast because I don't know if it's too, again, hot, but I'll say it with you guys, obviously, is that like, if there's people who are more marginalized as a result of the physical changes in their body, like if someone is in a larger body and that's going to inhibit on a societal level them getting a job, forget about the physical implications, which again are a little bit iffy. I don't believe that gaining weight means that you get diabetes or heart disease. It's not causative, I would say. It's like we said before, it's a symptom. I don't believe obesity is a diagnosis. I believe it's a symptom. It just means that your body's changing in some way that you need to pay attention to. That's all that it means. And it's a current status of being. It's not permanent. So that's why I don't understand why it's a disease state. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I think that if people are having more physical consequences, or, again, if I think of marginalized groups in America based on race and income, are more disproportionately likely to have illness, it feels unethical for me. If someone has diabetes or has a strong likelihood of getting diabetes because of familial risk in addition to socioeconomic status, I almost feel like those are the people I want to give the nutrition information to the most. So what I've gotten kind of shit on social media is like, saying that gluten could be inflammatory. I'm just using gluten's just getting hit just because it's in my head right now, but it's not for any reason besides that. But, saying that gluten is potentially inflammatory, you're actually being exclusive to low income or marginalized people or people below the poverty line. And I'm like, well, those people might be the people who need the information the most. Now, I wouldn't say that without saying, rice and oatmeal are cheaper than bread anyway. So there's other options. That's to me a cop out. And that's that coddling thing too. This idea of coddling people who need your help, like I can't imagine a more disgusting feeling than going to a practitioner and being condescended or coddled. That is not, being empathetic to someone's very and compassionate. Compassion and coddling to me are opposites, actually. Withholding and gatekeeping information from people to say, I know what's best for them and they can't handle this information, I think is total crap. And I see that all over social media. Like you can make legitimately budget friendly. I worked going in, in very low income areas in New York City, giving supermarket tours on dollar to dollar, the best options you can possibly make. And it's absolutely possible. And I can tell you that people really want this information no matter what. So, and this is like, I see this a lot coming from dietitians, but I'm not going to gatekeep the most important information from the people who need it the most, period. So that doesn't mean saying aggressively lose weight or something like that. But if we know something, and let me tell you, the three of us, functional dietitians in general, we're all on the same page nutritionally. The science is rock solid. We have enough information at this point to give nutrition recommendations on a broad scale and an individual scale. Yes, there's complications, like you and I, all three of us work with like these really minutia of mold, toxic, it's like there's nitty gritty science, but on the whole, we're good, guys. We have the enough information right now. It's not like any of these things are a mystery. It's not a mystery why people are more sick than ever. It's not a mystery why people are gaining weight more than ever. And we're not the people who are going to gatekeep it to protect you. I'm going to give you the information to protect you.
And I think we're not going to fear monger in that process, right?
Mm-mm.
It's really about the education. And then again, giving people that autonomy to make their own priorities, to make decisions that feel good for them. And, to go back to what you were saying about the coddling specifically and like withholding that information from people, to kind of bring that to even a broader scale in terms of our pretty crappy food system. If we're not going to speak up about these things, how is anything going to change so that people who are in, have a lower income status and less, accessibility to food, how are we going to get more accessibility and better food products and things like that if we're not speaking out about it and educating people?
I have to say, I made another post about this because I was wild. When they were giving vaccines to people, they were giving them Krispy Kreme donuts with the vaccines. And I was like, I made a post and I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shame Krispy Kreme. I'm not shaming a person for eating Krispy Kreme, but food shame is on the table. I'm telling you, I will shame the food companies, not the food. It's not about you eating the food that's a problem. I don't have any judgment. I understand why we eat all different, there's so many reasons that drive us to eat certain foods in certain ways. We're in an environment it's very promoted, but that doesn't mean that the guerrilla marketing tactics of food companies don't need to be called out. Sometimes when I see people like dietitians eating Oreos on Instagram and they're like, it's okay to eat. This is very far into the body positivity group. Most intuitive eating practitioners do not operate like this, but there are some dietitians who are like, it's crap that Oreos are bad for you. Any food is okay in moderation. It's like, A, who are you talking to? B, like Jillian said before, how is that information useful? And C, like, screw Oreos. If Oreos or these food companies are the reason, which I do believe they are, that even one person is in a hospital with diabetes or has a freaking heart disease, and we know that there's correlations between the foods that we eat, the lifestyle decisions that we eat, and all of this, and that food companies could be partially responsible, I'm going to scream about them all the time. I'm not saying it about the individual. I'm saying that, like Jillian's saying, there's huge environmental and societal factors that are working against us, and we have to be able to call them out. And it's not shaming a person to shame a food company, especially. It's not, I totally understand why a person would eat it. But to have a dietitian saying that, when I'm also like, guys, why did we get these degrees? Are we experts of nutritional science? That's a psychological conversation. That's not a nutritional conversation. So I think that is another piece of this too. Sorry, I got hot. I'm sorry. I got hot.
No, I fully support that of like, we should be upset. Like everyone as a we of collective, not just like us three, but like, it's like, but we three in particular and dietitians in general, like we have a soapbox to stand on where people respect or, ideally respect, the information that we have to give. And it's like, if we are wielding that information against the knowledge that we have, against the knowledge that, particularly knowing that like our food system is part of what's put us into this position. Like, I mean, it's a very easy comparison to like the United States and like our, dysfunctional food system and like Europe. Absolutely. Other parts of the world are catching up to us, unfortunately, but that's because, we've let like McDonald's run loose everywhere or whatnot. But it's like, we did this to ourselves in terms of like the way that our food system hacks our, our decision making and that we have, subsidized these crops that are these, going into these processed foods that make them inexpensive and da-da-da. And like, we could draw a pretty, like,
which
we
is
got
also
graphs.
targeting those same marginalized people, as we were saying before. directly.
so much. Exactly. And so it's like, if we don't get upset about this, nothing's going to change. And then we're just going to be sitting in the same place of like, we don't know how we got here. Like, what's going on? And like continue to fight about freaking Oreos. And you're like, it's about the Oreos, but it's not fucking about the Oreos.
It's never about the Oreos. The idea that 60 to 70, because it's like you can get different numbers, of this country is suffering from some sort of preventable chronic illness makes me sleepless and insane. And it should make everyone sleepless and insane who cares about other people. These are known to be preventable chronic illnesses. How does that phrase exist? How does something that's preventable, with the amount of money that we have in our healthcare system, in our food system, how is it possible that there are preventable chronic illnesses at all? It shouldn't even exist. And again, if my clients are eating whatever these foods are, they don't have an ounce of judgment from me. If my client has a desire to lose weight, not an ounce of judgment. But I'm going to call it like I see it. I almost made a joke. I was like, are the All Foods Fit dietitians being paid by food companies? Like, I don't get that. Like, I'm like, dude, like, right? Like, if we have a client who's, there's a very delicate time frame between someone having insulin resistance and that turning into prediabetes or diabetes. And you can make huge impacts and reverse the disease process, or people can cascade. And I know you guys have seen this a lot. When your hemoglobin A1C is teetering a little bit, you can flip really quickly. Like, to know that me not calling something out could be the difference between someone injecting insulin for the rest of their lives or being hospitalized for diabetes. Like, have you ever sat with someone who has to inject insulin? If there's anything we could do to help them, wouldn't we want to do everything we possibly could? I just, including the psychological relationship with food, but that's the part that always gets me so tripped up. I'm like, we know it. Trust me, we know. We have enough information right now. Don't we want to do everything we can to help people?
And everything we can to show people the opportunity again, right? Because so many people are just completely unaware that, the 60 to 70%, statistic that you just mentioned, or that 1 in 3, US adults are pre-diabetic and over 80% don't know it. Yeah. And there's another statistic that was more recent around finding that like only 12 or 16% of US adults are considered like metabolically healthy.
I saw that too. Yeah.
And I just don't think people are aware, and it's almost like loops it back to what we were talking about with the normalization of symptoms too. Like, people's expectations around, what normal is or what good feels like is, getting lower and lower. And, I think this conversation is like, I feel like we could go on forever and ever about this, but it's like, showing people, the opportunity in a kind and supportive way, and, holding food companies accountable, and just this, whole mess of things, really. I don't understand where there is a benefit with some of the messaging around food from nutrition health professionals that feel like it is, kind of taking people farther away from health. Can we
unpack that in a cruel way, which is that what is the benefit? Who does it benefit? That dietitian who's selling something, or nutritionist who's selling. It's not always it's obviously not. It's mostly not dietitians, to be honest with you. It's actually nutrition coaches and stuff like that usually. But that's what we have to ask too: is this messaging and nutrition information that I'm consuming helping me, or is it helping someone else's pockets? And I think that we have that intuitive knowledge to know and feel what we're getting from someone. It's also like I say when I look at something and I'm like, oh, that'd be great. Like if it's too good to be true, a lot of times it is, and I think that's the case a lot with these foods too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't, this is probably a little racy to bring into the mix, but Michelle, you and I've had this conversation quite a bit about there even being, the desire to just want likability and like actual likes on Instagram. And if you notice some of these, posts and things go viral, and it's like, going back to the gluten thing that you mentioned in terms of, everyone can eat gluten. There's no such thing as, gluten sensitivity. And then people are like, yeah. And, it becomes this like huge post. Can you speak to that a little bit if you have any thoughts?
Oh, I sure can. Yeah. I actually had a conversation with a dietitian who back to the seed oils thing, and in the context of this, a dietitian who posted that seed oils there's no randomized controlled trials to prove that seed oils are inflammatory. So that post got like hot again, because it's really easy to make a point and say the word randomized controlled trial and then have people feel like this is science, like this phrase, like that's science. I'm like, first of all, the whole goal of the scientific method is to constantly disprove yourself. So when people just say this is science, this is my new thing. If you're saying something isn't science, you need to back that claim up with science. So when I see people posting, and this is for the listener, when you see people posting like that's not scientific, like show me the study then that's not scientific. What's really confusing, and this is like I would only go into with your audience because your audience understands so much more than other people's do, but that to say that seed oils aren't inflammatory, there's no randomized controlled trial. I don't need randomized controlled trials to make nutrition recommendations for two reasons, okay? The first one is we can't wait for a randomized controlled trial to make every nutrition recommendation we make, right? It's not possible for us to make them based off of randomized controlled trials. Secondly, I don't dismiss any Ayurvedic or ancient wisdom in my practice, which I believe is verifiable, is also verifiable science in a different model, right? The other thing is when it comes to a lot of stuff with functional dietitians, and this is like, I have to hammer this point in. We're not basing things off of randomized controlled trials. We're basing things off of essentials of how the human body works. So for instance, when we were in dietetics training, any of us, and we were doing tube feedings for people, we could not give tube feeds or TPN that was high in, well, it's really EN, that's high in omega-6 fats because it was so immediately dangerous to people who were in the ICU that it could kill people. So again, like I don't need a randomized controlled trial to understand the pathways of how fats are broken down and utilized in the body. And I think that's the thing. You don't need a study to tell you the basic biology. This comes down to the liver detoxification thing that we always talk about too, which is that we see these posts online. You already have a liver. You don't need detoxification. It's like, okay, if you have a pancreas, do you not have diabetes then? Like you don't need insulin support. You already have a pancreas. Like it's so reductive. And again,
so ridiculous.
You don't need a randomized controlled trial, by the way, to say that you need like vitamin B12 to help your body function. Like you don't need a controlled trial. It's basic biology that we completely understand that I think other people just totally don't understand. So as a consumer, again, don't be so hot on the pages that are like, this is the randomized control study to end it all. Like make sure that the biology is following. I think that that's what's so important. I care much more about basic functions of the human body that we have nailed down more than I do about, I love studies obviously, but then I'm going to rely on randomized controlled trials. Heck no, I'm going to rely on the actual way the body works that will never change because we know that much.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not that there's no data either. There's, accumulating evidence. And I think part of being a really good practitioner is constantly, keeping up to date with these things in terms of the literature. But again, always like going back to that foundation of like, how the human body actually works, using like critical clinical thinking skills. So yeah, I love how you put that in terms of like bringing it back to how we know the body works. It's like, oh, duh, that makes sense.
Exactly. We don't need those studies. Like we already know the biology of it. We love them. We love to substantiate or to disprove something that we thought was true. We love new science. It's awesome. That's like the goal of it. But what I want people to leave with, because I know we got a little bit into the clinical side of things, but what I want people to leave with is that there really is a way to support your spiritual self, to prioritize the needs of your body and the rate that you want to prioritize them. The ball is always on your court. We are here. We promise you we have the information necessary at this point. I'm so happy to say that because I feel so confident in functional dietitians' capacity to help support people in their healing journeys, not make the changes for them, not to be that safe space to elevate people in their health. And I believe we can push the baseline of so many chronic illnesses. Some of them are really, really hard, but I think that we can push the baseline and just have the comfort and hope to know that if you are experiencing an urgency to lose weight, if you're experiencing any chronic physical symptoms, A, it's okay to want to change those things, and B, it's most likely possible to change those things too. You just need a really delicate, loving hand. And I think that's, again, I'm very biased in my love for functional nutrition, but that's because I believe it causes like what looks like miraculous healing, but it's just really good science. It's not miraculous healing at all.
It's like perfectly said. And I think that really good science, like partnered with the relationship. And like
it's all about the rapport.
Like we talk about this all the time of like, you should like your provider. You should feel supported and taken care of and listened to by your provider, because I know it's true for all of us. Like we hear this on the regular from clients that they're like, yeah, I was working with them, but like, I just didn't like them. They like, didn't feel like they were listening to me, or they didn't listen to me flat out. Or, I was coming to them crying about XYZ and they were telling me, but like, everything looks great. Like, just keep doing what you're doing, or we're just going to wait and see and wait for things to get harder. And it's, that's where like people are confused. And I think that the message today of like the intention behind the food choices, I love that you use that word, is really what it's about. And then that kind of like how finding providers or finding even communities, be an audience to, this is why kind of we do what we do, that are helping to reduce the noise and the confusion and like really creating messaging that makes sense for like your goals at that time.
I also made a now free membership for people to join to learn how to interact with practitioners, how to get the most out of every single appointment, and how to find really awesome practitioners. You're both on there. And how to sort through nutrition information. Like, what literal documents do you bring into appointment? What mindset do you bring into an appointment to get the most out of it? Even if you're working with someone really awesome, I think the beautiful part of functional dietitians and functional medicine providers, can you tell how biased I am, is that we can look at someone. Signs and symptoms are two different things. Signs are something that are you can see or measure, and symptoms are things that are felt. And I think that functional dietitians can take the information from your symptoms and turn them into something tangible for you to do, which is really amazing. So that means the most important part of a session with a practitioner is what you feel. That's the most important thing. Nothing else really matters, because we can't treat two people the same way. So that means that advocating for yourself in an appointment, speaking to how you're actually feeling is essential. And I think this is different for people than, people go in and they say, I need you to run this thyroid panel, or I think I have this diagnosis. Like, go into these appointments with your signs and symptoms and have that person look at you as a whole, because that is where the role of the practitioner is, to actually interpret signs and symptoms. And I think that functional dietitians do an incredible job of looking at the symptoms and the signs together.
I completely agree. And I think it's, really nice for our listeners to be able to kind of bring this together and have some things to think about in terms of going into an appointment, or, how a provider is making them feel and what that, relationship is like. And just, I think finding that sweet spot, that gray area that you talk about, so well, Michelle. So we've touched on a ton of different things today. This has been, super incredible. And I wanted to ask if you had, you just gave some kind of like killer takeaways, but to bring it all together, is there, kind of one message or one last takeaway that you'd want to leave listeners with?
Listen to yourself before you listen to anyone else. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if you don't know how, learning the tool of listening to whatever your brain is telling you, whatever your body is telling you, is the most essential way to gain great health. And then I think the second thing people can do is get practitioners who will listen to them in their corner. And there's this amazing thing that happens when we sit in a session with someone who cares about us. You actually start physically healing from that session. So that's the most beautiful thing. So I think that, first of all, listen to yourself in whatever way you possibly can. And I have some tools, in my world to help people to do that. And that could be in a reflection way. It could be a journaling way. It could be physically speaking your truth out loud. It could be speaking to yourself out loud. Get to know yourself and really listen to yourself and understand you're not only the expert of your body, but you're the expert of your world. And the most amazing things in the world happen when you listen to yourself over anyone else, over us, over any really good practitioner. I don't care. You come first. And then align yourself with someone awesome. I have 2 dietitians in mind right now who are in this room.
I love it. And where can people continue to learn from you, connect with you? Tell us about those resources.
There's more hostile rants on my podcast, Quiet the Diet. I'm kidding. Kind of. The Quiet the Diet podcast. I am on Instagram at Michelle Shapiro RD. Again, if you want to join that free community, it's only recently free. I just realized again in this gatekeeping piece, I was like, well, I'm going to give all the answers away to the healthcare system. So that is, you can join that at quietthediet.com, which is the name of my podcast, or on my website, michelleshapirord.com. I'll give you guys the link for the free community people can just pop into. And it was like the joy of my life to sit with you guys today. Thank you so much for having me.